Hey folks, it's another episode of the Compulsive Podcast or Videocast if you're watching the video of this, and we are very lucky, very fortunate to have another special guest with us today. I'm going to introduce the name here, and I'm going to try and get this right. Daniil Strizhov. I think I'm pretty close, as I understand. There you go. Yeah, he didn't hang up on me, so I feel like I'm pretty close. He's currently working at Amazon. He's been doing iOS development. Hello, Daniil. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Yeah. It's nice to be here. Yeah. I'm doing iOS a bit, but like about 6 years. Initially, I started from like very specific to Russian language, which is called 1S. And it's like C-style language, which is really, really strange. And if you don't know how to code on that, like you wouldn't guess how to do it. Very specific.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm originally from Ukraine, but I started my career as a developer in Russia, and 1 year ago I moved to Toronto, Canada, and work for Amazon for now in Prime Video.
All right, so we're going to get into this here. I've got Daniil with us today, and we're going to talk. We've got a few different topics that we want to talk about here, and I think that a lot of these are important topics that come up more and more these days, especially with larger companies, and that's kind of an area that we're going to angle this towards, because of course a lot of developers, the goal or the dream, however you want to put it, is to work for one of the top companies, right? The Amazons, the Googles, the ones, the Apples, all of these ones, and so we thought, let's get together, let's talk about this and see if we can help folks out and give them not only some insight into the experience, but how to go about, preparing for the interviews and things like that. But I think, the first question I want to ask, because this is something that comes up all the time, and this one, as you and I were talking before we were doing the recording, this one stands out, monolithic code bases. Right, I think we've all inherited at least one in our time, as development has shifted from these huge applications into a more, dare I say, maintainable route. So, do you want to talk about that? Because I'm sure you encounter this, probably all the time, right, with where you're working now. So, let's talk about how we break down those monolithic code bases that we all dread.
Yeah. So regarding the like monolithic code bases is sometimes it's quite a mess. Sometimes it's on contrary, it's easier to work. It depends on your team size. If the team size is rather small, maybe monolithic is the approach you want to go because you prioritize speed over sort of quality and scalability, because I don't know, you want to do MVP, etc., etc. So usually it's not there is no such a thing like as a bad architecture or something. It's just that you need to select architecture that will suit you well. But in the modern days, like obviously monolithic code bases, they are not preferable usually, because it's really hard to work on. Your code becomes very coupled, mainly because even if you have like good intentions in terms of, okay, I want even in monolithic code base to build a clean architecture, etc., etc. When it is very easy to do a mess, you certainly will do at least part of those mess, and then it just become more and more and more, and it can become a total mess eventually. So of course, in like big companies nowadays, we usually break down big code bases, and there is a reason for that. We want to move as fast as possible, but we want to have like multiple pizza teams. Like we want our team to be fed with just 2 pizza, and we don't want to have too many people in the team and just move fast. So, and if we have so many teams, it's just like very, very difficult to work on one code base. So we try to break it down, to separate it to like smaller packages for backends, to like maybe like microservice architecture, etc., etc. But and sometimes even like what I encountered in my practice is, like, for instance, we didn't have a monolithic code base altogether, but we had a huge part, and a team overgrew, and we wanted to split a base for separate team to operate faster. Yeah, and it's also not trivial, because if you can stop and pause, if you can just make everyone else just to stop their work, and you can calmly separate this base, yeah, it's one approach. Of course, it's rather fast, but when you have many teams, and while they are working, while they are doing their job, you want to also split the code base in the way that they almost don't notice this change, this transition. And this one is a bit harder.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think, we all experience this, right? There's this idea of either it's a new application, or there's this current application, and someone says, hey, we're gonna rework this, or we're gonna do a new version of this. And there's never enough time given in a project to okay, if I could do the ideals, architecture, and do this and do that, you never get that amount of time. So you always end up with teams overlapping each other. For example, one that I encounter all the time with sort of mobile apps, invariably there's a team trying to build the app or the front end of the app, and some of the APIs are not ready. So, you end up with, okay, who's going to stub out some APIs, and then we'll all work to make it work like that in the end. And I would imagine that when you're taking a large code base and trying to rework it into more, is it fair to say, reusable components or chunks, there's those decisions where it's like, okay, who's going to take this part and own this and get to decide, do you all come together and say, okay, what are all these APIs going to look like? Or do you hand something off and say, okay, this team is doing this part, and they know that they're going to want APIs to look something like whatever they're building, and then they go back and give that to another team who's probably busy building some other part. So how do you handle those kind of situations? Do you just basically come together and try and help each other get through it? Or do you remain sort of very agile and say, hey, whatever I've got today may be completely different tomorrow?
Yeah, so basically how we handle it, it's initially it should be ownership, of course, on the code base, and for the project it should be an owner. So basically, if, for instance, our team do this separation and re-architecturing, so at the moment of the project, we are owner, and we make decisions. Though, the process of these decisions is not that trivial. We cannot decide whatever we want. We need to present our ideas. We need to discuss on those ideas. We need to address all the points. But eventually, if after all these processes, and sometimes it's really long process, especially if you have some frictions over some issues, it could be not that fast as you would expect. But eventually, how we did it, so basically we said, okay, we are owners, and we will do this, and this, and we will support everything, and we'll try to do it as smoothly for you as possible. And afterwards, after we finish the first phase, when all the teams that involved will gain more autonomy, then we will reevaluate our goals and decide who owns what. For instance, do we want to have a shared or common packages between teams that moved apart? Do we still want to maintain this, or we want for them to be completely separated and do whatever they want? And it's a discussion. And what you don't want usually to do, you don't want to address all the issues in advance, because you want to have the decision as late as possible, because at that time you will have the majority of information, and it would be probably enough to make a right decision. But if you made all the decisions on the start of the projects, apparently it's not a good decisions.
Yeah, it's funny how that works out, right? You think you've got everything, and you're like, we're good to go, and then you start it, and then it's like, oh yeah, there's that thing, or there's that thing, or we forgot about this. But I do like that flexibility, because I would imagine a lot of the time, one of the underlying things that you're looking at here is how can we make this module, library, however you want to phrase it, you know, usable for many different things, right? So, for example, I know when I'm looking at something, if it feels like something that's either going to be used in another application or another part of the application or something like that, you tend to take a very different view of how you craft that. And I'm gonna ask the question that I think all of us developers are like, oh gosh, here we go. Do you document it as you go, or is it more of a live conversation and there's just enough documentation to keep everybody moving forward? Because I'm sure that's part of it too, right?
Yeah, sure it is. With the big companies, I didn't work with like all the fan companies or something. I have sort of just Amazon and like some company that I worked for. They were big enough, but not like Amazon size, and not that many teams. But for like huge companies that have many teams, documents is a requirement. And it's like when you start to work, like initially you can think that it's bureaucracy, they like all the documents just slows you down, etc., etc. However, I have a, like after working on it, I have a different opinion because it's something that like basically it's just your thoughts. You prepare your thoughts, and while you put your thoughts like on writing, usually you have a better idea even yourself. And
Yeah.
only after you evaluate it and you think, okay, now I'm ready to present those ideas, then you start to presenting. And another thing is like you don't know at the time for how many people and teams you need to present the doc. Initially, it can start as, okay, I present this doc just for my team. And for that, you can think, okay, maybe I shouldn't do the doc. Maybe I should just discuss. But you never know. And often it conversation moves forward and your team wants to discuss it across like few teams, and then it could be even like for 5 teams could be discussing this doc, etc., etc. And you cannot like present your ideas each time like verbally. It's just inefficient. If it is prepared, if you wrote this doc once, you just can present this doc to any team, whatever, and you take them, give them 10 minutes to read it, and you're good to go. They are ready to ask you questions. But otherwise, it would be super inefficient.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, you know, one scenario that comes up a lot, and I think we're all getting used to it now, is this realization of at some point anybody could look at your code, right? Now that we all use source control and repos and however that may look, you know, when you stop and you realize, ooh, yeah, anybody in engineering might look at my code or my documentation at any time. It's like a stop sign that makes you stop and say to yourself, think twice about this, right? Because it's one thing, we've all done it, right? You write that piece of code quickly to solve a problem, and you make that fatal mistake of saying to yourself, yeah, I'll go back tomorrow and make that better. We all know it's never going to happen, but we tell ourselves, and the next thing you know, it's in a repo, and someone's asking you, do you really think that was the best way to do this? You know, so it is interesting in these multi-team environments, and access to each other's code, and especially if you're writing code that other people are going to use. I think it makes for a better experience for everybody, because without realizing it, you're learning disciplines and skills that, you know, these are the kind of things you will take from to every team, to every product, to every company. And I always think it's good for people to get these kind of things up front. Something we'll talk about later on that I know both of us care about a lot is mentoring. And I think that, you know, some of that comes into play as well, which is to get those kind of what we call the soft skills into play here. So I'm going to ask now, another question I want to ask is, you know, working in a huge company with, you know, responsibilities to so many users, both outside and presumably so many departments and teams and everything else inside as well. You know, what advice would you give to someone if they were, you know, hey, I successfully well, actually, let's do this the other way around. Let's start with the interview. So, what advice would you give someone if they were to interview to, say, join one of these teams in a big company, something like that? Are there certain things that you think, are beneficial? Go think about this, or go, approach a problem a certain way. Any advice you could give there?
Yeah. Maybe if I would give one main advice, it would be never be shy. Ask the questions. It doesn't matter how silly they sound. Even now, sometimes I hesitate to ask, and I'm trying to force myself to ask. Even if like everyone knows the answer, it's just the best way for you like not to fail. Sometimes it could be a sort of a weird question, though usually people don't think so, but you can like you can have so much less problems with that.
Yeah.
Even simplest questions, even if it's a huge project and you just heard something about it and everyone talks about it, and you don't know and you know nothing about that, just ask the question even on a sort of large meetings. And it's also something that my manager encouraged our teams to do, and he like constantly repeating like don't hesitate, like ask questions, and I think it pays off like really really well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. And, I echo that statement completely, both for myself and I say to everybody on my teams, regardless of how long you've been doing something, whether you're new to a team, been there a while, even like I say, myself, ask as many questions as you think you need to. And I always tell everybody too, if you need to ask the same question multiple times because you didn't get it, great, do that, right? I always sort of emphasize to folks that work with me, and this is the approach I take is, keep asking questions, even if it's the same question, until you think you're really understanding either what the solution to a problem is or what you're being asked to build or whatever it may be. Keep asking until you're satisfied. And I love it when folks, like you mentioned, say, look, ask the questions, right? There are no silly questions. If it's a question, it's because you need something from it. So keep asking until you get it. Otherwise, we may go away and do the wrong thing, right? And that can be one person, the entire team, or anything like that. So yeah, I echo that statement. Always ask questions, and don't feel embarrassed to do it. We're all required to remember so much these days that sometimes you can forget the silly little things, right? That it's like, I've done this all my life and now I can't remember how to do it. That's okay. Ask somebody, right? All right. So another question that I have here, is about preparing for interviews. I did an episode recently where I was talking about not being afraid of technical interviews, right? It's part of our job. You should always expect to have to do one at this point, especially for the top companies, right? So, let's talk about that a little bit. It's impossible to know going into an interview, I think, exactly what they may ask you, but I think there are kind of some common areas, right? So what do you think if I was to come to you or someone was to come to you and say, hey, what do you think are like some of the sort of basic general things that I should at least have a passing knowledge of? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, sure. I had quite a plenty interviews across like different companies. I had interviews with Apple, even like two. At 1 week it was two on sites.
Nice.
I had with Google, with Pinterest, with Atlassian, and other companies.
You've been through them all,
companies.
Yeah. You could probably write a book on this then, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So it depends on your level. But usually what you need is algorithms. If we are talking about like technical interviews, many companies ask, but team decides. For usually at all companies, like exact teams, they decide. what they want to ask and if they want to ask algorithm or not, but like 70% chance that you will be asked, so you need to be prepared. Maybe one reminder that you shouldn't be over prepared. It what happened with me. I was a bit afraid of interviewing, and I always thought like, okay, it's like not enough. I need to solve more tasks, like 50 more, etc., etc. And it's like constant fear that like, okay, you might fail, but actually you need to act. You don't need to think too much. You need to act. Yeah, not sure about current economy because nowadays it's a bit trickier than it used to be, but I think like advice is still applicable. And regarding algorithms, you need to know just the common patterns. You don't need to like learn everything by heart. And whenever you solve a task, oh yeah, another one that I had a problem with. Initially I thought that I need to come up with ideas for solving this algorithm by myself. And sometimes I spent like 10, 11 hours just trying to solve one task, like one question on a lead code. And it was like useless because you don't want to do this. You don't want just to sit and pull your hair and just, okay, like it doesn't work. What do you want to do? Just give you a time, like give yourself 40 minutes, and if you cannot come up with like any meaningful solution, just read a solution, try to understand the solution, and then like recreate the solution from your head. And why is that so? Because like all these questions, they have patterns, and better for you to solve more questions and understand this pattern and memorize the pattern rather than just like reinventing for yourself. Even if you like create by yourself, I don't know, the binary search like previously you didn't know, for instance, and now you created it. It doesn't matter. Like companies will not hire you for that. You just need to learn patterns.
Yeah, that is a great advice because you can become obsessed with the perfection of one answer, and like you say, it's kind of that thing of when you're at school and you do tests, right? One question is not 100% of the rating, right? It's maybe 5%, 10%. So yeah, I love that advice of don't obsess about perfection or the answering like the question. We should explain to folks that usually there's more than one round of these things as well. And sometimes you have different people looking for different things. I know, for example, I remember I did one time and, like the first kind of the first two interviews, I think it was really more to sort of judge whether they felt like I was, kind of even worthy of the next round, as it were. And then once we got to like the third round, we were deep down in the code and I was sitting with some of the team members. And so at that point, it was clear that, okay, this one's about the code, right? This is you got to put something on the screen here kind of thing. And it's got to work, So I know that we should definitely tell folks don't think that there's just one of these things and then that's it. That's probably very unlikely, I would think, at these larger companies. So expect multiple rounds. But I think also, would it be fair to say that perhaps it's easy for us to say it, but almost try to enjoy it and relax, right? It's not. I don't think one thing is ever going to, be your downfall, as it were, and someone's going to judge you and say, well, you got that wrong, so that's it, you're off the list, right? I think you always get like a second chance, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some like I had interviews where people were like sort of a bit confused, and sometimes I felt even anger regarding my answers. And I'm not sure if they behave this way usually, or I said something wrong, but it's like usually just a small percentage of people who behave in this way. Majority of people would want you to succeed, would like to help you, and especially on interviews, it's also a skill to listen where the interviewer guides you, and you must listen to that, and you must follow those should or must, I don't know, follow this direction, because like it signals for them that you sort of understand assignments, and you read between the lines, and like it's easier for with you to communicate with you. And if interviewer gave you a small hint and it helped you to succeed and to eventually come up with a good solution, it's a good thing. You will be evaluated as a high bar, because you understood from the small hints.
Yeah, and actually, that is a very good point about listening, because I think that circles back to like we were talking about earlier on, which is if you think that you didn't quite get what they're asking you to do, ask questions, right?
Yeah,
and make sure,
sure.
because I couldn't imagine nothing worse than you think that you heard them and you think you understood what they were asking for, and you give them an absolutely excellent solution to a completely different problem than the one they were looking for, right? So it is, like you say, that listening and asking questions, it's something that it's almost a case of get used to. That should haunt you throughout your entire career, right? Listen and ask questions. So that's good.
Yeah, definitely.
Something else I want to ask you about here. I'm just looking at my notes here just quickly, because something that you mentioned, and I'm trying to be conscious of our time as well, and because as is always the way with these things, once you get talking with folks, you can talk for hours. But I noticed that something that you mentioned is mentoring as well, and I wondered if you wanted to touch on that at all, because that is something I love to do with folks. And I tell them up front, look, I may not be the best person for this, but I absolutely love trying to help people either get started or find a way into their, the path that they want. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I like mentoring, and you need to look at it like from several angles. Like you usually want to be a mentor, and you want to be someone who to find a mentor to help you, and it actually can be for different levels. I don't think that you need a mentor only for a junior positions where you want to learn as much as possible, but even on a higher positions, for instance, I would like to have a mentor to deep dive on my management skills, because I think I am better at technical skills rather than sort of management and especially people management. During my career, I mentored people, and I think also while you are mentoring, you also gain a benefit for yourself too, because you revisit your knowledge. You need to be well prepared to present your thoughts to your mentee. Also, you look you look at the people as they grow. And you also think, okay, I see them growing that fast, and you're also thinking, okay, maybe I should grow too, because especially if you feel that you're stuck at your current position. So I think from different viewpoints, mentoring is a very good thing. And usually, if you have time and if you have a desire, go for it and find a mentor or be a mentor for other people. Especially, it's true. So if it's true for people in a higher position to find a mentor for themselves, also it's true if you're a junior, you also can mentor someone who is very, very junior, and while helping them, you will grow tremendously too.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think, if you're mentoring someone, you gain so much from it yourself without even realizing it. And like you say, the skills that you're learning without even knowing it, communication skills, with folks who maybe don't understand something as well as you do, or, if you're, you've got a mentor that you're working with, they're learning to communicate with you in a way that you'll understand it, and, sort of grow together there. But then also you're learning potentially some pair programming there as well. problem solving, of course, working with a team. These are all things that I think we all pick up without realizing it. And, we tend to think of mentoring as a technical thing. And whilst that's true, it is only part of the process, right? And I agree with you too. I think it's a good point that, a lot of people think mentoring is, for the folks just coming into a field, but you're right. It is all levels. Or, for example, if a developer is looking to maybe become a team lead or something like that, go and see if you can find yourself a mentor to find out what that position's really like, right? And as we've a common thread here, ask questions, right? Because it might sound like something you want to do, but when you find out the reality of it, you might not. And it's better to find out before you apply for the position, because you might get the position and then afterwards realize, ooh, this was not what I thought it was going to be, and something like that. So I think that's a great way to look at it. Is there anything else here that you want to bring up and for us to talk about?
Yeah. One more thing, maybe it's like it's additional style of learning too. So like, don't think that if the information, like foundational information, is the same, it doesn't and you just need to go for one way of learning it. You need to try different angles, and mentoring is especially valuable because it's not static. It's dynamic. It's adjustable to your needs, to your questions, to your state of mind at the moment. And above all other forms, it's definitely one of the most valuable. And you don't usually you're not bored. Also, you're not all you can for instance, if you are learning like UIKit, right, for iOS, and while discussing with mentoring, you can find out other stuff, but and like how like UIKit is applicable to some areas, or what are the alternatives in different fields, or something interesting. On contrary, if you would learn it by yourself, you would just focus on UIKit and you wouldn't broaden your knowledge. So it's important.
Right up there with that is something that I think we all learn pretty quickly, which is whatever technologies I'm learning and using today, probably a few years from now will look very different. UIKit is a very good example of that, as clearly Apple is now, saying, hey, that Swift UI thing we keep mentioning, you better get used to it, right? So you're quite right. And funny enough, that question comes up to me a lot when I'm, doing my live streams and things like that. And I'm sure these are discussions take place all the time, which is, UIKit or Swift UI or AppKit or, whatever it may be. And even other platforms, like I do work with React Native and that as well. And it's funny because it serves to show, I think, that there is no one universal answer. And, go with what feels right. And I guess that works with the teams as well, right? I know teams that I work with, and so this is a question for you. As a team, do you sit and discuss, okay, what technologies do we think best suits solving the problem here, and then kind of get a majority vote and go forward with that?
Definitely we discuss and we try to evolve. As a team, we try to learn. And we try to enhance our project to be a better version of itself as a human, almost. So we are constantly learning, and like for instance, we recently, like 1 month ago, it was WWDC, and we had even we decided to divide and conquer, and watching like one person were watching one day, and then we would come up with ideas and how we can actually improve, and what can we use in our project, etc., etc. Yeah, it's nice. And also, while we're presenting these ideas, as I mentioned like before, we use docs too, even for such a small things, because if we need to discuss it in a broader community, yeah, the doc is ready also. And then while making decision, yeah, usually I'm not sure like about majority. Rarely actually we decide like just like let's vote, and if it's like 5 versus 6, we will go to this approach. Usually we're trying to discuss to the point where we like inclined towards one solution over another, and we're trying to evaluate and trying to have a comprehensive list of pros and cons prior to moving forward. Also, we do some sort of a POC. So, for instance, if we want to move forward with like you don't know the tool, right? Or for instance, like you have a Swift UI and you want to move forward and rewrite the whole application for a Swift UI. We do some like small POC. We would create this proof of concept where we build just a small piece, the small feature, and then documented the performance of this tool, how easy it is to use, what are the like all pros and cons, and would like discuss and then decide.
Great, love that. Yeah, often what we do, folks that I work with, is similar thing. Someone or a few folks will either have encountered something or have an idea, and will say, okay, well, go look at that, and then come back, like you say, put a documentation together, put a demo together, and kind of present it to us and sell us on the idea, you know. And I think that is also a great way of keeping everybody engaged and invested in the solutions, right? Because I think that, you know, as developers and engineers, there's nothing worse than, you know, you get a document and tells you how to do this thing, and then someone tells you how to make it, right? And it's so much more interesting, I think, to us when you're given the freedom of, here's the problem, how do you think we should solve it? Because it gets those extra gears going in, you know, to stop and look at this and go, oh, well, okay, I now feel like I can entertain any option to solve this problem, as opposed to, well, we've always done it this way, so we're going to do it. So Daniil, thanks so much for joining me today. I think it's been a wonderful conversation, and I know the listeners and the viewers, they're gonna get some really valuable information here, I think, to take away and to think about, and hopefully, you know, whenever we do these interviews with folks, I'd like to think of it as kind of the start of the discussion, and now the listeners can take it away, think about, you know, what's been put forward, and maybe it's got them thinking about things in a new way. So, you know, we'll put links in the show notes if you want to reach out to Daniil and talk with him. But thank you so much for joining me and giving the time and expertise today. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.